So let's introduce our guest. First of all, Troy DeArmond, you're the Chief Technology Officer at ofCourse Scheduling. Can you tell us, Troy, how you got into course scheduling?
Sure. I was the technology director of a research center at Washington University in St. Louis's School of Law. And our mission was research. But once a year, and only once a year, the dean would always come to us and ask us to help with one administrative problem they were having. And in 2009, that problem was course scheduling. And it seems people, faculty and students alike, were not entirely happy with the schedules that were coming out, and initially they just asked if we would go find something that could replace their system. And so my team looked at the options on the market, and after we did that, we had to go back and say there's nothing we can in good conscience recommend you use. But the stuff was just terrible. So they asked us in turn if we would try to make something, and we did. And little did I know that would begin a 10-year obsession for me with the scheduling problem.
So that turned into a software company.
It did turn into a full company, because what happened was we started making schedules at WashU Law, and another school learned we had this system, and they begged is a better word. They begged if they could use it, and we were just curious if it would work somewhere else. So we gave them a system, and it actually worked better at their school than it did at our school. And I think probably a year or two after that, this person reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm on a listserv and people are asking about scheduling systems. Can I mention you?" And I said, "Sure," not expecting anything to come of it. And he did. And then within 5 days, 22 schools reached out to me. And in time, the thing got too popular. The directors at my center said, "Get this out of here." They put it up for sale. I got a couple people together. We bought it, and I've been working on it ever since.
Right.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
Well, no, thanks for that history. That's great. So Stephanie, tell us, how did you first get involved in scheduling?
I began my first registrar position back in the spring of 2004. And the first job duty, of course, was to create the schedule for the upcoming quarter. And it's been ever since, so 16 years.
16 years as a scheduler. At how many different schools?
5. This is the 5th school.
Okay, awesome. So Troy, can you tell us what you think from your perspective? What's the single biggest thing that schedule makers can do to make better schedules?
So I think the biggest thing that can be done to improve the most schedules would be to work on improving course availability. And by that, I mean seeing that classes that should not be scheduled at the same time are not scheduled at the same time. Now, this is a hard problem just when you first look at it, because it's a lot to manage. But it's actually a harder problem because there's multiple dimensions you need to protect against. Obviously there's subject matter, and that's what everybody thinks about when you think about this. Like, we have a second-year accounting student, they need to take both of these classes, and you shouldn't schedule those 2 classes in conflict. That's obvious, but it's also hard to do. But you have other factors like course characteristics, intensive writing, required courses, core courses, experiential courses. All of those should be tried to pull apart as well. And you also have other things like organizational and pedagogical factors, like, these are our 5 most popular professors. We shouldn't schedule them all at the same time. Even if the subject matter isn't the same, there's other reasons you'd want to pull them apart. So a really hard problem, and I mean, it's nearly an impossible problem if you're manually building schedules, but even on a programmatic system, it can be challenging.
Okay, thanks for that. Stephanie, how about you? What's something that you think schedule makers can do to make better schedules?
I think for those of us involved in scheduling every day, we know what needs to be done, and it comes to us quite naturally. But I think it's also really important to have everybody and all parties involved kind of understand that process and the complexities involved in it. So I actually recommend asking for a few minutes, perhaps at a faculty meeting, to discuss the issue, the common issues, schedule, what you'll do to address those issues as they come up. I think that really reassures faculty that you're working to meet the needs, not only of students, but of faculty as well. For example, last week I attended a curriculum planning meeting where questions about the schedule came up and why we schedule classes at certain times. And because I was there, I was able to address them right away. So I think it's really important to have the person creating that schedule have a seat at that table where those issues are being discussed on a regular basis, so that we can all be on the same page.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And that reminds me of once I was talking to an associate dean of academic affairs at an East Coast school, and he told me that once the faculty understood that it was an algorithm that was generating the schedule, complaints from the faculty evaporated because it was perceived as more fair. And so that goes to your point about the faculty actually understanding how the schedule is getting made. So Troy, we're talking here about better schedules. How can you even tell if the schedule you have is better?
That's a great question, maybe the greatest, because it's my sense that a lot of schedules go out the door, and the makers of those schedules do not really have a good sense for how strong or weak those schedules are. It's a hard thing to do. And I think, because of my background in the empirical research center, I'm in a unique position to deal with that. And I remember at the center, we used to really look to a scholar named Lord Kelvin. And Lord Kelvin was a 19th century physicist who famously said, "That which cannot be measured cannot be improved." And we took that to heart at that center, and it influenced a lot of our work, and it still influences the work I'm doing today. So a tip I would give, or a recommendation I would make, is you have to have a way to evaluate the schedules you're producing to know if they're strong or weak, or compare two schedules to each other. And if you're already doing something along those lines, always be on the lookout for ways to do it better. And really, I'm not giving that tip. Lord Kelvin is giving us.
So how do you do that? How do you score a schedule?
At ofCourse?
Yeah.
Like now, okay, so at ofCourse, what we do is we score on 2 dimensions. We score based on course availability or course diversity, and we score on how well we did in satisfying day and time preferences. We blend those 2 scores together to get a master score. But by doing that, we can immediately tell you if a schedule is stronger than a neighboring schedule, and in what ways is it stronger or better.
Okay. So if you're going to give a score based on how well the schedule met faculty preferences, obviously you have to collect those preferences. Stephanie, how do you go about getting preferences from your faculty?
Well, the first step in our process when starting the schedule is collecting the classes that they want to teach for the upcoming year, and then work with our senior associate dean for academic affairs, and we create a list of classes and who's teaching them for each semester. At that point, I enter that information, the class name and the professor, into the system that we're using to schedule. And the system automatically sends them an email and says, "Can you please tell me what your top 3 day and time preferences are for your classes?" That's all compiled into one location, and we're able to access those very easily and then run that schedule with those preferences included.
Okay, great. Troy, do you have any tips on gathering preferences?
Yes, I have a lot, but let's let's do 2. Here's 2 big ones I think matter a lot or can help a lot. And the first one is get multiple preferences for each course. And the second is use a common form to collect those preferences, meaning don't just ask for text answers. So on the first one, get multiple preferences. I've seen lots of cases where people will send out an email and say, "You're teaching this class, when do you want to teach it?" And they'll get, Tuesday, Thursday at 2 back. But then if they can't make that work, they need another time and they don't have one. So what do you do then? You'd have to go back to the professor and say, "Are there other times?" And so just simplify that and get a couple early, because not only maybe you can make either of them work, but maybe one of them works better for you. So just have a couple to work with while you have the attention of the professor. On the form, and this is just mostly, don't use email text. Just don't ask them, "When do you want to teach?" Because anybody who's done that process knows that in response, you're going to get anything from 3 sentences to 3 pages in reply. And the burden is on the schedule maker to figure out what they mean. And, what I learned over the years is that, and this is going to sound crazy, but at a lot of places that do preference collection in that manner, the preferences aren't really even used. What will end up happening is the schedule maker is going to make the schedule they know they can make, and then they're going to try to back those preferences into it, moving things around to fit them. And then it's just such a time-consuming process that in the end, they run out of time and they can't really accommodate them all. So that would be it. Get multiple prefs and use a form to do it.
Right. Can you show us what one of those forms looks like?
Oh, yes. Okay. Please tell me if you see a web page.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. So let me just describe the interface briefly here. So this is the ofCourse administrator. And, you know, in the upper left corner, what happens there is the school logo will fly there. And then centrally it says Fall 20. That's going to prominently showcase the term that is being worked on. And then below that, you have 5 boxes. That's the main navigation of our system. And we break the scheduling process into 5 steps. And the first step, you just make sure you have everything in the system you need to make a schedule, and that's namely rooms, profs, and courses. In step 2, you enter the course load you want to enter, and that involves entering the course, the professor, and the capacity of the class. Third step is about preferences. Fourth step is about making computed schedules, and the 5th step is about polishing and publishing those schedules. So preferences is in step 3. There's basically 2 steps to that. The first step is to contact the faculty, and we have a contact mechanism that you essentially come here to step A, you say select all, and you hit a button, and everybody who's scheduled to teach in Fall 20 is going to get an email asking when they want to teach. Once that, so they're going to get an email. It's going to look like it came from your school, from your rep, and if they hit reply, it's going to come back to you, meaning we're not really involved in this. But what they are going to see is they'll get an email saying, hey, everybody, it's that time of year, time to make schedules. Please let us know when you want to teach. And they will click the link and they will come to a form that looks like this, which is our preference collection form. And it's pretty basic. Again, your logo would fly in the upper left corner. It's going to describe the class they're responding for. We collect 3 preferences. And in our model, it's what's your most favorite, what's your second most favorite, and the third is kind of a fallback of sorts. But they give us 2 pieces of information: days of the week and times of the day. And if they're teaching multiple classes, they can see preferences they gave for other classes as well. They also have the ability to give comments. And in our experience, about 80 to 85% of comments that come in are in defense of them getting their first preference. And thankfully, because we satisfy at an average of 80 to 85% of first preferences, that means you can throw out 80 to 85% of the comments, but we do track them all the same. And then once they fill those out, they just hit record. And that's how they record their preferences. If they have multiple classes, they will see the other class there and they can click that and come in and see the preferences they gave there, or provide preferences if they haven't already. But that's the process. And the nice thing is for the admin, you go to step A, you say select all, you push the button, they all fly, and you kind of kick back while they get responded to. You don't really have to deal with it. All this is collected in the background in the system.
Right. Oh,
I
that's
think
great.
it's important to, sorry,
Mhm.
can I
Go
interject
ahead,
for a
Stephanie.
second? I think it's important to note that if you do have classes that you know have to be on a certain day or time, because, for example, you have I know someone teaching a class that can only be there on a Tuesday at 2. You can do that. You can hard set those preferences in that system so that the other classes are kind of scheduled around that. So that possibility is there.
Good. And we had one question come in with that interface they just saw. Is that for the teachers? Yeah, that's for the teachers or the profs or the faculty. They see that, they set it themselves. And so essentially, as a schedule maker, what you just do that once, and then 1,000 people are looking at that page, or 500 faculty, or however many you have. Stephanie, let's talk a little bit about space. So space is always at a premium in most institutions, and some institutions have it terrible right now, right? Because what used to be a 60-person classroom is now a 30-person classroom because of COVID-19. Is space a challenge for you, and how do you deal with it?
It is in regular semesters, right? Our biggest classroom holds 104 people. That's it. We have a couple that hold more than 50. So we're always looking at the best way to use those rooms. And I think the biggest advantage of using a computed schedule is being able to quickly make changes if needed. But fortunately, we have a senior administration at UCI Law that has made decisions quite early on about the pandemic and knowing when to call it and when we're going to be remote. So we haven't had to deal with a lot of those COVID type situations that many schools have. But in general, we've always liked more space, of course.
Right. Good. Well, I guess you're fortunate in that way, and that you've gone virtual. But I guess the problem will come back later. Troy, how do you think schools can improve space utilization?
I think where you're challenged on space, the one thing that we see where we can bring a lot of value to schools is by varying start times. When you use an optimized scheduler system, you can have better variety there. People who do manual schedules or sometimes called block schedules, they tend to have common starting lines through the day. So they'll have a start line at 9, they'll have a start line at 10:30 and kind of move through the day like that. And that works well if you have a lot of space, if you have extra rooms, or if all your classes are the same size or are the same duration, like at a high school, everything's 50 minutes. But at a college, if you have classes that range from 50 minutes to 90 minutes to 3 hours, that's where some inefficiencies can bleed into a system like that. Because if you put a 50-minute course in a block that's equipped to handle a 90-minute course, you create a 40-minute hole. And if you do that throughout your week, you're going to have a lot of little holes that are going unused, where if you could imagine an ability to compress all them together, you can fit an additional 6, 10, 15 classes into, namely the primetime grid from Monday to Thursday, 10 to 2, you get better utilization of all your spaces.
So why would anybody do it that way then? Why would you have just 9 o'clock, just 10:30, just 1?
A couple of reasons, but the two biggest are probably, one, it's easiest for a human mind to organize a schedule that way and get everything on the grid. And then secondly, it's easier to police for course diversity, course availability that way. Because when you vary your start times, more classes will be scheduled at the same time, kind of in conflict. You will have more of that. So you need a really strong ability to see if you're degrading your course diversity by doing that. If the 3 classes scheduled in conflict now have no relation to one another, it matters less than obviously if they all have common subject matter or something. You need to know that's happening. So it's understandably a really hard thing to manage.
Right. So that makes sense.
Hey, sorry. Can I add one more thing about space?
Of course.
We were talking about preferences earlier, right? And I said, I can give you I could talk preferences all day, but this one's big because this was one of our hardest lessons we ever learned. And so this is semi-attached to preferences in that, when you collect preferences, never ask what room they want. And this is just my experience, my story, right? So we were making schedules for a couple of years and everybody loved the schedules and was happy and everybody's getting first preferences. And then we thought, hey, we should let them say what room they want. And we did that and everybody picked a room too. And then everybody hated our schedules, like a lot of yelling and all this, because it turns out every school has a couple of rooms people prefer or like. And if you ever have a junior faculty member in one of those rooms over a senior faculty member, people are going to hear about it. So I would not recommend folding rooms into the preference process. But just, I want to save anybody else that heartache we went through.
You're just asking for it, sounds like. Okay. Stephanie, let's talk a little about computed solutions. So you at UC Irvine, you recently moved from a manual process for developing your course schedules to a computed solution. Can you tell me a little bit about why you changed?
Yes, well, for 14 years, I used a manual process for all aspects of the schedule, right? For getting lists of class offerings, to faculty daytime preferences, to creating the schedule. There was the big whiteboard and the magnets moving around these classes. And yes, it worked, but every year it was a miserable process that would take much too long to complete. So when I was given the opportunity to investigate scheduling software, I jumped at the chance. So I was looking for a process that would save everyone time, that would create kind of a better schedule, and the entire process would be more efficient. So now, after implementing our current process, I can complete the entire scheduling process from getting faculty classes to getting faculty preferences and creating a schedule and publishing it to students within 2 to 3 weeks, which is absolutely amazing. And it lets me turn my focus onto other things. We have a very small department at the law school. So, for example, last spring, we all went home mid-March because of COVID. And by that point, the schedule for fall was out and done. And I was able to turn my focus onto trying to figure out how to implement final exams from a remote location, right? So it's time saving. It has helped us out immensely the last couple of years.
So it saves you time. Do you feel it also gets you a better schedule in the end?
It does. And I very rarely have faculty come back and go, well, you told me I'm teaching at this time and I don't like it, right? We sent out, for example, last week, we created the schedule. We're a little behind this semester and sent out an email to faculty and said, okay, the schedule is complete. Here are your days and times. Not one person came back with, I don't like it. I got a lot of thank yous from faculty members who were really excited that they got those preferences that they wanted. Not always the first, but the second or third as well, right? And there was not one complaint in those dozens and dozens of classes that went out.
Well, that's fantastic. So do you have any, for schools that are considering moving from a solution that is perhaps sticky note and spreadsheet based to a computer solution, do you have any suggestions on making that switch?
Just kind of go for it. Don't be afraid of the unknown. Like I said, 14 years, the process was miserable, but it worked, right? So we really had to trust that we were going to get those same results. It was going to work even better when we flipped to this new system. And I think it's also really, really important to get everybody on board and explain that process to them. And then when your dean asks you to also create kind of a backup schedule, right? Do it the way you've also always done it, just in case. No, don't do that. Trust that this new process will work and the support is there if you need it to help you through that process the first time or two you use it.
Oh, well, that's great. Troy, how about you? Do you have any suggestions for schools that are considering making a change to using a computed scheduling system?
Yeah, in my experience, Chris, the biggest challenge for schools considering a change is deciding to change. Making schedules is hard, but I think change might even be harder. And, the hesitancy is totally understandable in that a schedule is a critical asset for a school that touches a lot of people. But I would say it's because it is such a critical asset for lots of schools that they need to ask a question they need to question the process. And I would ask the question, do you make your schedules the way you do because you make the best possible schedules? Or do you make the schedules the way you do because it's the only way you know how to make the schedules? If you can come back with an honest answer to that, I think it will help you know if you should investigate alternate paths or different solutions to do that.
What was that question again?
Oh, did I break out?
No, I just wanted do you make schedules the way you do because it makes the best schedule?
Do you make schedules the way you do because it makes the best schedules possible? Or do you make schedules the way you do because it's the only way you know how to make schedules?
Right. Makes sense. So, Stephanie, professors on campus have a big peer group, right? They have other faculty members to help them out and address issues and things like that. Schedule makers don't have that, do they? Like there's sometimes just one or a couple. Where do you go for help?
I found it really helpful to find a peer, right? Find a registrar or a scheduling person at another school, another campus, and discuss those concerns with them. Whether it's a manual process or whether you're using both the computed system, the same one, you can kind of share those tips. Your schedules are going to be different. You're going to have different challenges at each campus, but some of those are going to be similar, and you can share those strategies with each other. Instead of perhaps always calling Troy with the question, you can go reach out to your colleagues at other schools.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Troy, do you have any tips for schools that have recently moved to a computed solution for their schedules?
Yeah, an interesting / funny thing we see is that schools coming from manual build processes only want to make one schedule. And we're trying to entice them to make a bunch of schedules because, in an optimized system, you press a button and in 90 seconds, you have a schedule. And so sometimes it's funny trying to convince them to do that. They feel like it's wasteful or greedy. They're like, I'm happy to have one. And so when you come to a place where building one takes so much effort, the notion of having a dozen is hard to kind of wrap your arms around. And so enticing them to do that is kind of an interesting thing. But you want to leverage that ability of that system to kick out so many schedules, because each one will have a little variety. And there are things you can do to influence that variety, or you can just hit the button twice in a row and get 2 different schedules just to see, okay, it'll approach the problem a little differently each time. And the goal in that process is to, produce 12 schedules and then pick the best one that got made or the one you like the most.
Okay. Can you show us what that looks like? Like the 90-second process for making a schedule? Can you do it in 90 seconds?
I can do it in less, I bet. All right. So that was our preference form. Are you seeing me?
Yep, got it.
Okay. So we were in step 3, and that's preferences. And so computed schedules happen in step 4. So if I come to step 4, it also is just kind of a few step process. And step A here deals with creating schedules. And all you have to do really is you come here and you hit the start the scheduler button. And that's all it takes to get it going. Now, what's happening right now is it's pulling in data from steps 1, 2, and 3, and it's transforming that data into something the algorithm can understand, and it's handing it off for the schedule to be built. If there are problems, it will let us know on this screen here. We would get a green box and a red box, and you want 2 green boxes, and we got that, which is good. But if there was a problem, it would give us a red box and say, there's a problem with this course's settings. Now, an example of that could be, you might have double booked a professor or a room and said, hey, I want this professor to teach on Monday, Wednesday at 11. And you might have said that twice. So it'll stop you here and say, that can't happen. So please fix that before I even try to do anything. So once you get this, you go to your schedule manager. And this is the page that will list all the schedules you make. And this top one here is being worked on right now. The 2 gray boxes says it's processing. So we wait for that while it works on it. We can click in the last schedule we made and look at it. And you notice there's a placement rate, 100% placement. You want to make sure all the classes were solved. And then you get your scores here. And you get the overall score, which on this is a 94. And then you get your faculty prefs a 93, course diversity is a 94. This is a pretty good schedule. So if we come in here, we can look at the schedule that was made. The top of the screen here, you get some views that you have. You can drill down into the scorecards for the schedule. Below that, you get some filters that you can use individually or kind of in concert. And then next, you get a key that's kind of telling you what came out of this schedule. You know, we have 54 first preferences, we have 5 second, we have 1/3. And when you start scrolling down that schedule and seeing it, you want to see a lot of green and blue. And with any of these options, if you click on a box, it'll unroll and show you more detail about it. Now, like these funny boxes here are saying this is what we call a short course. It doesn't run the whole semester. When we click into it, we can see it starts on October 19th, it ends on December 4th. And then below that, we have the preferences that came in with it. But this is the process you do, that you run a schedule and then you will build these up. And so this one's now done, and it took 48 seconds, not 90, sorry. But you amass these and then you just kind of go through them and you find your best schedule is the process for that.
All right. Yeah, that's one thing I didn't understand is that with an algorithm, there's literally billions and billions and billions of possible schedules. And so every time you run the scheduler, you get something slightly different, don't you? So Troy, once the algorithm generates a schedule, can you make changes to it? Like
Yes.
what if you don't like something about what the algorithm came, like it was close, but not perfect, and you just want to make a little adjustment?
Yeah, so you're always going to have things you're going to want to change about a computed schedule. My senior engineer doesn't like when I say that, but there's always going to be something you want to change. You know, this class got scheduled at 8:30, you want to move it to 9, stuff like that. So what happens is in step 4, when you find that schedule that's like the best of the dozen or whatever, you're going to take that schedule to step 5. You're going to set that as what we call the working schedule, which means this is my favorite schedule. And then you go in and you view it and you can start clicking on classes. And when you click on a class, it'll take you into a properties screen and you can change anything you want about that class at that point. You can change the prof, the course, the start time, the days, the room it's in, the duration, the co-teachers, all kinds of stuff. So you start making those changes, you save it. And then so you polish that computed schedule and make it look more like what you want. And then now after you do a few of these edits, when you come out, like a little alarm light will come on in the system. And that alarm is saying, look, you just modified a schedule that I knew had no conflicts on it, but you might have just made a conflict by moving that into that room or on those days. And you should let me check your work. And so what happens then is there's another button you can click. It's as easy as starting a schedule that kicks off our collision management system, and you hit that and it's going to go in and it's going to look at all the modifications you just made, and it will come back and let you know if you double booked anything prof room, things like that. And it will show you what you double booked and where it's at. You can then go back, click on that class again, and you can either modify it again, or you can back out the changes.
Stephanie, what kind of manual adjustments do you find you need to make to a computed schedule?
Funny you mentioned that. We're doing that this week, actually. And the one that I found I use most is just the addition of a new class. Right? You have the schedule, you think you're good, and someone comes along with, wait, you actually want to add these 3 or 4 new classes to the upcoming schedule. It's really simple to go in and add that class to an already completed schedule as opposed to starting over.
Right, that makes sense. Okay. Let's talk about schedule publishing. So once you've made all your adjustments, the schedule is finished. Troy, do you have any tips about sharing the schedule?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a something not to do, or I don't know, maybe it's a to do. What I would say is avoid versioned schedules at all costs. And that is, by that I mean like an Excel file or a PDF document that goes out and says, here's the schedule. Because anybody who's made schedules know, as Stephanie just alluded, these things are going to change. And a lot of times they change right up to the first day of classes. So putting something essentially in poured cement and sending it out to people to look at is trouble, in that it's going to create confusion if people look at that a week later or a month later, and they're going to write and say, hey, why is my class here? And then you would have to say, oh, you're on version 13, you need to be on version 22, let me send that to you. So figure out ways that you can share your end schedules using, real-time views, that if you make a change to it, that it will reflect everywhere. And obviously, I'm not talking about the parent system here, or SIS. This is all happening before the schedule ever makes it to SIS, and you're doing your review rounds and proofing it with the faculty and all that. So you need a system outside of your SIS system that can do that.
Can you show us what a published schedule looks like?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so and of course, and a neat thing about the ofCourse system is that, you see me? Are you seeing me, Chris?
Yep, now we got it, yep.
Okay. A neat thing about the ofCourse system is, so the polishing, so step 4, we were making computed. Polishing and publish happens in step 5. Select a schedule is where we pick our working schedule. Modify is where we modify the schedule. Check for conflicts is your collision management system. Schedule reports is something that will help you review the schedule that you have and expose any issues. And then export is what you're asking about here. Now, a neat thing about this is we have a bunch of public views. So the first one's just this kind of graphical layout that shows the schedule in a Monday to Friday grid, or if you do Monday to Sunday or whatever. So it just presents the schedule that way. There's another view that's more like a catalog style view. And this one, a lot of people prefer this view. And then this view is nice because you can sort by course or by faculty. And you also have filters you can apply and say, show me all the experiential courses. Or things like that. And you control these filters. We don't preset them or anything. And then you have like room layouts to help you see how these things are falling in your rooms. And, more like fuel gauged out, that long classes show long, short classes show short, stuff like that. So there's a variety of views. This view is super cool. This is called the overlap report. And how it works is essentially it'll give you a list of all the classes you're offering. And these classes on the left, it's saying if you take this accounting for lawyers class, you won't be able to take any of these classes. And so that's a great planning tool for students who are registering or faculty who want to see who they're up against. But this is a very, people like the schedule. And this is what I was trying to say when I was coming in here, is that this is a neat facet about using a platform like ofCourse, and that these schedules were all recommended to us by other schools. Like they say, hey, wouldn't it be neat if you could do this? Or we did this, can you do this? And so we get to build these tools out, and then other people get to, everybody, when we published the schedule, all of our clients immediately had an overlap report that they got to use. And, that's something we work on every year, is extending our system. And then lastly, you can get it as a text dump and just take it into Excel, because a lot of people like to take things over there and filter and review and drop columns and stuff like that. So those are the public views of how you can share the schedule out. Now, after you do your reviews and it's all finalized and you're ready to go forward, a newer feature we have is this notification system where you just come here and you say select all, and it's going to select everybody who's teaching in that term, and you say preview mailer, and you essentially can come here and you're going to send every person who's teaching for you an email, and this center column has a sample of the email, the left column has everybody who's going to get the email, and you send this out, and in the next 2 minutes, 80 people are going to receive an email of what their teaching assignments are.
And they'll get a link to that schedule.
Well, that's optional. There's settings in there where you can either share the room or hide the room, or share a link or don't hide a link. So we have a lot of configurable settings because some people don't like to share the room until closer to the day for the kind of the reasons I alluded to earlier.
Right.
So there are settings, but you can or cannot. You choose.
Right. And what if you get pushback on the schedule?
Did you say if?
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry. That's something that's going to happen. It's not if, but when you get pushback on the schedule. So that section in step 5, there was a section there, I think it said schedule reports. So all schedules made will have bumps and bruises, polished or not. There's always going to be something that somebody doesn't love. And a good scheduling system will expose those bumps and bruises to you early so that you can do one of two things. You can either, obviously, you're first going to try to fix it. You want to go in and say, can I make this not happen? And then if you can't make it not happen, then what you can do is go to the person or the people it affects and tell them that it did happen and see if you can come up with a plan together to get out of it. Or just let them know this is going to happen. Like, for instance, let's say one of the reports in there is called a proximity report, and it will tell you if you have classes meeting with less than a 5-minute break through your polishing. And so if you see that, you go in and you say, I need more time between these. But when you look, the courses are landlocked and you just can't move them either direction without causing more problems. So then you can go to the faculty member 7 months early and say, hey, we have this issue with your class. I just want to let you know that you have people coming in 5 minutes after you. If that's a problem, I looked, and if you're willing to move days, we can move you to another day. So have a way to spot these issues early. And then so you can try to A, fix them, or B, go try to figure it out with the people it affects.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd much rather hear that in March for a September class than at the end of August, right? They're much more open to working with you and making those changes months ahead of time versus at the very last minute.
Yeah, that makes sense. Stephanie, do you have any final tips you have for schedule makers?
In thinking about what has worked well for me, and I mean, whether we're creating a manual schedule or using a computed one, is really setting a timeline and making that timeline aware, making others aware of that timeline. For example, first, I will set a date that we have to have the schedule published. Of course, there's a little bit of a buffer built in there because things are going to change. But then I'll work back from then. Like, when do I need the list of classes? When do I want to send out the daytime preferences? How long do our faculty need to complete those? Send them back to me. And then I'll create the schedule, that I need the faculty to review classes. So I will set those dates before even starting the schedule, and I make everybody aware of those. Both our dean, our assistant associate dean for academic affairs, we're all on that same page and working for that same end goal and that date that students are expecting that schedule.
Great. Troy, one last tip for schedule makers before we go to a Q&A.
Okay, as corny as it sounds, Chris, my final tip is to remember the student, that all of this energy and effort is going towards support of their academic experience. And this is a process that they get little to no participation in, the process itself or the end product. But imagine creating schedules where every student got to take every class they wanted. I mean, that is the goal, or that is a goal at least. And of course, we are trying to build a platform that can get you as close to that scheduling perfection as possible each and every time. And that drives a lot of our work. So I would say a big tip is just to remember, through all this toil and anguish and deadlines, to remember why we're trying to do this good work that we're trying to do.
Well, thanks so much for your insights, Troy and Stephanie. And we'd like to invite the audience now to use the Q&A panel at the bottom of Zoom to enter your questions. And while we're waiting for you to do that, just a couple of things. We will send you a recording of this afterwards, so you can reference it along with links to specific portions, interesting portions within it. Next week, we'll send you a summary document with the 15 tips in it, extracted from what Stephanie and Troy said. I also just wanted to share with you on our website on ofCourse.org, we have a series called Scheduler Spotlight, where we profile people like you, the registrars, the associate deans of academic affairs, the administrative staff that build schedules. And we found it really interesting to meet who are these people, who are building schedules. And if any of you on the call would like to be profiled for the Scheduler Spotlight, just send me an email, chris@ofcourse.org. And we'd love to have a short interview so that we can profile you in our Scheduler Spotlight series. So now we're going to look at the questions we have here. Okay, one question: how long does it take to switch from using a manual process to a scheduled software?
Stephanie, you went through it, so you might be better to.
In our experience, it was a pretty quick process. I think we reached out to Troy maybe in end of October, beginning of November-ish one year, and we were ready to use it when we created our fall schedule in January. So just over a month. And of course, there's a holiday in there as well. So it was only a couple of weeks.
Yeah, Chris, I'll just add the nuts and bolts from the ofCourse perspective. Usually there's a 1 or 2 introductory calls where you tell us what your schedule's like. We tell you how we do schedules and make sure that's a good fit. And then if you are interested at that point, we'd begin the kind of the setup process, our onboarding process. And we would send you a spreadsheet that's more of a questionnaire. And it would take somebody at your school, we'll say 2 hours to complete. And then you send that back to us, and then we will schedule you for an install week where we will get your environment ready. And on your installation week, come Friday by lunchtime, almost always, you will get access to the system and it is ready to go. And then in that email, when we send you the credentials, we'll ask you to do we'll offer to do a pre-flight call with you, which is our training program. And so 2 hours on your part, a week on our part, and then the system's ready to go.
Great. All right, we have a question here. Does the system, presumably ofCourse here, allow for the creation of multiple sections of the same course?
Yes. Yes, you can have as many as you want.
Okay, great. Are there, another question here, are you doing anything different due to COVID?
I feel like Stephanie spoke a little bit about her COVID work earlier, but so I would say in my conversations with schools, the biggest challenge a lot of our clients went through was getting answers from their administrators about what to do. What do I need to make? And they could not get scheduled. They could not get answers on that. And I think it's because the administration didn't know. So, my first suggestion would be get an answer, but we all know that ain't coming if they don't know. So what a lot of our clients were asked to do is they said, you need to make me a schedule for every possible scenario. I need full in person, I need full online, and I need a hybrid. And thankfully, because of our system's ability to kick out multiple schedules, that was decent. But we also built a lot of new tools during the COVID process to help schools build COVID-centric schedules. And we tried to accommodate every strategy we heard of. And so the first thing we did is we built the ability to clone finished schedules. So you could take an in-person schedule into the system and then polish it and make it half online, half in person, stuff like that. Because again, all these things have to happen pre-SIS. And so, and we did other things like we made ability to configure for adjusted room sizes, adjusted course sizes, added break times to support sanitation. So it's kind of easy for us to, I mean, it was effortful, but I mean, we were able to centrally build tools to support the various COVID strategies. And it was just a challenging time for everybody, for sure.
Okay. We have a question from John at Utah State. Does the system handle cross-listed courses, like a folklore course that's taught as both English and history?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. Also a question from John, is there workflow built in where a department head has to approve a faculty submission?
No. So that gets more into effort management and the definition of the course load, which of course does not participate in, because, you know, in our early development of the system, when we spoke to schools, there were a lot of schools that were happy with their process in that regard. And what we found is everybody needed help with scheduling. Not everybody needed help with curriculum planning or effort management. And when we looked at how people did it, there was a real wide array of how people approached the managing of that and how they would define the course loads. Some, it just came from the dean's office. 2 people in the dean's office would define what was happening. Other schools would pull their faculty and say, what do you want to teach and when? So there's a real wide array of what we saw there. And so we didn't participate in those early planning steps.
Great. And Stephanie, you just chime in if you have anything to add on any of these. They seem to be a little technical in nature, some of them. So we've got a question from Jonathan from St. Joseph's University. Would it flag courses for potentially low enrollment, like those sections that might be in danger of cancellation?
We do not currently do that. But so let me explain another part of the course kind of methodology. That what happens is with our clients, they will ask things like that. And then we add that to a list of all the things, all the features we've ever been asked about. And so, like, if you were a client of ours, we would add that to the list. And then if another person asked about it, it would get a hash mark. And as things get hashed, they move up the list. And if you were one of the people who talked about that, and when it comes time, if we get enough hashes next to it and we start working on it, if you are one of those hashes, the neat thing is you get to help us build out the feature, because we'll reach out and say, what do you need? What are you looking for it to do? And you get to participate. So all of our clients are kind of collaborators with us in that regard.
Great. And feel free to just keep on putting your questions into the Q&A panel in the bottom. I see some coming in the chat. One from Alice. Alice, I recognize that name. You use the ofCourse software. She wants a timeline for developing an exam schedule from the course schedule. That's something that's being worked on, right, Troy?
It is. It's actually deep in development right now, and we are hopeful we will have our V1 model out come January.
All right, thank you. A follow-on question from John. Is there a way to pre-assign some classes to specific rooms prior to running the algorithm for the rest of the classes?
Now let's
Yes, there is. And we do that for our 1L classes. We know how big they're going to be, so we know what rooms we need. So we will go in and hard set those rooms before running the full schedule.
And Chris, let me add something to that. That might be one of the most sophisticated parts of our system is control for room placements, because sometimes, I want this class in that room. We have one room that can accommodate that class, and this is it. But there are other times where you would say, let me think of an example here that'd be a good example. Let's say it's a big law school and they have 3 courtrooms, like mock courtrooms, and they have a class, moot court. And they say, okay, we got moot court. It needs one of the moot classrooms. I don't care which one. So we have an ability or a feature called room amenities. And what you can do is you can attach amenities to rooms. And for those 3 courtrooms, they would put a courtroom amenity on it. And then when you add that class to the course load, you can say, this class needs a courtroom. And that way the system will funnel it to one of the 3 courtrooms, and you don't have to pick which one. So if you get enough of that stuff in play, you get super great utilization out of your space, because if you put it in one of the courtrooms, it could mess up other placements, where if it went in this courtroom, you'd be better off. So we have a lot of rules to protect rooms. If you only get to use it from 8 to 12, but arts and sciences uses it from 1 to 5. So we have a ton of room specific controls to help with that stuff.
Great. I have a question here from Paula at Ohio State. I think she was typing quickly too. But we fill in lower level with lecturers and grad students closer to the start of the term. Can you build the schedule without names and offer multiple sections that would just be placeholders? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we do that at two kinds of levels. We have, and one of them is a newer level or a newer type. We have what are called TBD professors, and that's what you use if you had a professor and they left suddenly, like they got ill or they went to another school and they were teaching 3 classes. You would assign a TBD professor to those 3 classes because you know you're going to hire one person that's going to take those 3 classes. You just don't know who it is. Now that's different than you scheduling 20 classes to say, we only know who's going to teach these. With that, you use our open professor space. And then with that, the algorithm can double book those open professors, where a TBD professor assignment, it would never double book a TBD because you're saying that's going to be taken over by one human. But an open, they can be booked in conflict. Now that's a great example of a feature that was asked for, we didn't support, and then it kept getting hashed and it moved up the line. And that feature, I think that went in earlier this summer. So if any ofCourse people are on, that's a very new feature.
Great. Yeah, here's a question I have. I'm hearing in the news that college budgets are getting slashed everywhere. Do you have any suggestions for schools that are having their budgets slashed due to COVID? I mean, it's kind of hard to get a new system at this point, right?
It is. You know, we were asked to cut our budget by 10% and then by 20% to kind of have that plan in place back when we first all went home in March. And when I did that, I was like, okay, I'm willing to do that. I will cut out travel. I will cut out papers and pens. I will buy those on my own. But I really felt that leaving, or using ofCourse, leaving that in there was beneficial because of all the reasons that we've gone over, right? It saves me hundreds of hours in creating the schedule so I can turn my focus into other important projects that are happening or new issues that are coming up. We can create multiple schedules if we have to. And if we decided when we were remote, but if we decided to go back hybrid in the spring semester, I can go back and make that schedule. So there's a lot of benefit in keeping that system, even though your budget is being cut. Peace of mind.
And Chris, it's a harder argument to make about just the HR factor, but like a lot of schools will report that they saved 70 to 100 hours in of people time. And it's hard to quantify that exactly because you have different levels of people participating. You have deans of academic affairs, you have assistants, you have registrars, and staff people helping. But the thing is that you get the curious thing is you get all that time savings and you get a better schedule, like a significantly better schedule. I mean, I'm going to argue that you're going to get a way better schedule than if you have all those people spending twice the time trying to do one manually. So there's time savings and there's a better asset. And we already talked about how critical a school schedule is to an institution.
Well, Stephanie and Troy, thank you so much for being here today and taking us through that and answering all these different questions for schedule makers. If any of you attending have questions that you'd like me to follow up with for you, I can direct them to either Troy or Stephanie, or answer them myself if I happen to know. Chris, CHRIS, at ofcourse.org. Send me an email and I'll make sure your question gets answered. I see a couple of last questions coming in here, but I want to respect that we're coming in at 11 o'clock. So we'll answer those offline. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody, and look in your inbox for a recording of this video. And next week, we will send you a hard copy summary of everything we went over today. Thanks so much. Now I'm looking for the button that says stop broadcast. I don't see it.
Do we just have to, on the honor system, everybody leave?